Hey, Vinnie. Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for having me today. It's great to share with you what I've been up to. We've certainly been friends for many years, but I've gone through some evolutions in my career, and delighted to share with you what I've been up to over the last couple of years in my work and a little bit of a career adjustment for myself. So my name is Jason Corsello. I run a fund called Acadian Ventures. What Acadian Ventures is an early stage venture capital fund, very specialized or focused on the future of work. I'm going to go into that a little bit, but we're a little bit unique in the aspect that we are probably one of a few super specialized fund. And when I say super specialized fund, we only focus on a very specific niche or a very specific vertical around the future of work. Now, many of you or many of the audience are probably assuming of what is the future of work? I hear that term all the time. What does it mean? And why should I care about it? Well, a core part of our fund,
especially after 2020, why should we care about it, Jason?
Well, Vinnie, the world has been flipped upside down in the last year.
Absolutely.
And so, this is actually a slide I created when I first launched the fund in 2019. And part of our thesis of the fund was rooted in this idea of we're going to see more change in the next 10 years in work than we've seen in the last 50. Well, the fact of the matter is the last year has completely accelerated that. And we've seen more change in the last year than we've probably seen in the last 10. These are some of the trends that you see here. Certainly automation has been a big trend, but what we've seen just specifically over the last year is work's been flipped upside down. We've been forced into a remote work model. Now we're trying to make sense of, are we remote? Are we hybrid? Are we, what does the future workforce look like? But work now has completely changed. And so the thesis of our fund has become probably more relevant than it has or would have been when we launched the fund a couple of years ago. And so how we think about our fund and the vision of our fund is really helping that next generation of companies build solutions that are redefining work. What is redefining work? That's everything from the work itself, right? So what we see today is companies really putting an emphasis on that work experience, that employee experience. Culture is a core foundation and DNA of a company.
Just to clarify, you're not investing in real estate, co-working, or anything. This is more the people's side of work.
That's correct, Vinnie. So really around traditional HR tech, work tech, people tech, absolutely. So that's SaaS-based businesses. We don't look at marketplaces or real estate type. So Vinnie, what we see is part of work, and our vision of our fund is that not just work is changing and what we expect out of our employers, but the workers are changing themselves as well. So no longer are we steadfast in just hiring full-time workers. We've got this availability of contingent workers, freelancers, the desire for the younger demographic of workers to want to work for multiple employers and do things and do work on their time at their own will. So we're seeing a whole shift in terms of that flexibility of work, the remote aspect of work, working anywhere, anytime. And as a tangent to that as well is building in wellness programs as part of that incentive and benefit to workers. So the worker and what we want out of work is changing as well. And then lastly is that foundation of the work infrastructure. So things like artificial intelligence, certainly that's been a theme for many years now. We're still very much in the early days, I believe, of using machines to help automate different processes and take advantage of the data that we have. But that work infrastructure is changing around thinking about our workforce in a very different way. Things like diversity and inclusion have become so much more important than they ever have been or will be. But also things like trust and privacy, managing our data, being able to control the data or what our employers have access to the data is changing. So really, at the end of the day, future of work to us means both the workers changing, the work itself is changing, and that infrastructure that supports the workers, the employees, in this next generation or this next decade of what work looks like is going to be completely different. So, our fund is really much focused on that. We think it's a big opportunity. There's many venture funds out there. In the last 2 years, we're seeing every day new venture funds emerge, but we think there's a really interesting opportunity in the future of work category. And this almost dates back to my days at Cornerstone On Demand. So when I was at Cornerstone, we had launched a corporate venture fund. And I'd always get the question from entrepreneurs of who are the VCs that really understand future of work tech, HR tech, and I could never come up with a singular name. And that doesn't mean there's not great venture investors out there, but I believe there was an opportunity to create a highly specialized fund focused because it's a big market, it's a growing market. If you look at the top 10 public companies around in work tech, this is actually a number that I don't know what the latest number is. My guess is it's probably 2x because I put this number together about 9 months ago. But you've got companies like Workday, ServiceNow, in my opinion, is a future of work company. You've got companies like Slack that are now in process of being acquired by Salesforce. But we track a list of the 32 largest private, or I should say public companies, and this has been a market that's been on fire. When you look at companies that are focused on this future of work category in the public market. So we believe it's going to, the trend is going to continue. The opportunity for early stage companies to emerge, to redefine what this next generation of companies look like, is happening as we speak. And so that's what we care about and where we're investing today.
So you're going to collapse HR, collaboration, experience, many different, what are separate markets right now?
Yeah, we are seeing certainly some convergence of that. But how I think about it is there's a couple of categories in the future of work. One is around people management, right? So the core, HR solutions that are out there. One is around productivity. So the productivity apps that we use every day, whether it's Atlassian or Slack. But there's also solutions for recruitment. There's solutions for managing payroll within companies. And so it's a as you saw on the last slide, it's a fairly broadly defined category, but I don't think most people appreciate how big, the future of work HR tech category is. It's a massive segment. You certainly know it by your experience, but it's not just, the way I look at the future work as well, which is a little bit different from a lot of other VCs, is it's a global market, right? We are investing globally and we think there's opportunities globally, and no longer is it just a US thing where we're just going to invest in the US companies and it's just, regionalized. We think that there's companies that are being created around the world that can solve this on a global basis. And whether that's around, some of the categories that you see here, but a couple of areas of interest more recently for us has been one around this whole area of flexible and remote work. I mean, we've certainly seen the shift in the pandemic. Everyone was forced overnight to go to remote work. And now we're trying to reconcile what's the best model for our own individual company. But more specifically, this distributed workforce model is something I believe is going to be a continued trend going forward.
Yeah, Jason, I have another series where I've been interviewing. So I interviewed a CEO in Dubai recently, and he had moved there from Malta, and previously he had worked in Bali and Shanghai. And it was fascinating to talk to him because I called him a digital nomad, and he walked through all his criteria where he decides to move to. And he's got 3 daughters in tow. He's teaching them virtually using tutors in Bali. I mean, just a fascinating model. Then I interviewed a CIO who's been working from an RV. She works for a space tech company. So it's like, wow, the future of work is going to be really, really interesting.
Yeah, Vinnie, we just invested in our most recent investment that we just signed the investment documents within the last 2 weeks is based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Now, if you would ask me even 2 years ago, would I be investing in a company in KL? I would have said, probably not. I don't know the market, but it's become a global market overnight. And so, what's fascinating with companies like that is they were telling me their whole cost structure of their engineering staff. And it's mind-boggling, from a business model perspective, the advantages you have building in Southeast Asia today versus, in Silicon Valley. And yeah, certainly there's advantages of building in Silicon Valley. There's an expertise, there's a network. But the fact of the matter is, I think, today you can build technology anywhere in the world. It just depends on what it is you're building and what that philosophy of the engineering model is. But, we look at companies globally now. When I first launched the fund and kind of wrote my operating manual, I thought 50% of the company investments are going to be in the US and 50% are going to be outside of the US. And fast forward today, we're right on that mix of half of the companies in the US, and we've got companies in London, Berlin, Dublin, Ireland, Malaysia. They're actually headquartered in Singapore, but
the other thing that's emerging is secondary and tertiary cities, right? I'm interviewing an executive tomorrow who has pretty global, and they invariably go with secondary and tertiary cities. They don't like to put any of their regional business in big cities. Just philosophically, it worked out well for them. It takes a little more work, right? Because it's getting to those secondary cities is not as easy and so on, but they've accepted it and they do very well. So KL is, Vietnam is emerging as a major market there. KL, Kuala Lumpur. It's good to see the world is becoming smaller in that sense. We just can't depend on China too much for too long. So it's good to see all that.
And one other point I want to emphasize, Vinnie, is one of the interesting continuing trends, and we've been seeing this for a long time, is employee tenure continues to shrink, right? There's just not as much employee loyalty as there once was even 10 years ago. I did some research, and the average tenure of an employee across all companies is about 2.5 years now. And if you look in Silicon Valley, I don't remember the specific numbers, but I heard yesterday, like Tesla, the average employee at Tesla lasts around 18 months. And so we've got, and I don't want to say it's necessarily disloyal, but we've got this workforce that is just completely distributed, or, selfish may be a word. But I guess what I'm saying is that maybe the model has shifted, which is, we've gone from a very employer-centric world to an employee or worker-centric world. We have options now. And so there's a lot of work that still needs to be done and will continue to be needed to be done around creating this great experience. So you're an employer of choice, that people want to come work for your organization, that you're providing the skills or the development so people can build their skills over time. And they can even take them with them if they decide to leave, that they have options in terms of their workforce. I've got a couple of my limited partners from Workday, and I've got lots of friends at Workday as you do as well. Workday has the ability for you to take on gigs and within the company and work on special assignment projects. And it's a whole new world that we're now embarking. And the technology that we need to support that completely has to change. And that's the bet that we're making as early stage investors. And so, Vinnie, just to wrap up our story a little bit. So for us, as I've probably said a couple of times now, we've launched our fund in 2019. We just closed our fund. We're a super specialized fund. And so why that matters is because we believe that, at least in our world, there's a market knowledge that is important to be able to understand. I'm a believer of, you have to understand the past to direct yourself to the future. And I think in our market, certainly we can learn a lot from many of the incumbent companies, but also, I think that knowledge of market, knowledge of buyer, knowledge of what the emerging trends, that's important. And so that we're building a fund that hopefully has that kind of baked into how we make investments. And so we could tell you, hey, we know this is the size of the prize, if you will, the size of the market. We know here's the buyers and how you need to navigate through that buyer journey. So that's something that we think is a little bit unique for us because of our specialization. Two is I like to consider ourselves a collective of operators and builders. And why that matters is because, and what I mean by that is many of our LPs, the investors in our fund, we've got just over 50, have been experienced being operators, right? They were CTOs, CMOs, COOs, CEOs at companies like Cornerstone, Workday, SuccessFactors, Zoom. And what I've tried to do is be intentional to bring in assemble a group of folks that can be helpful to our portfolio companies. Because they've been through journeys, they've made decisions on in building of their businesses of what worked and what hasn't worked. And so that's something that I think is very important for early stage companies, is have some of that institutional knowledge of companies that have been their predecessors, that have built companies and SaaS companies at scale. And then the third point, Vinnie, about our fund is, and this is something probably more of a personal mission for me, but as I tell people, we're not an impact fund, but we're impact investors. And what I mean by that is that, I've got 3 young kids. I certainly want to leave the world a better place than when I came. And so we've signed up ourselves, like many companies, Salesforce and Workday and others, to the 1% pledge, or the pledge 1%. And so we actually donate 1% of our profits, our carried interest, as part of a fund to a foundation that we've set up. But more importantly, it's something that we try to infuse into all of our companies. And it doesn't necessarily need to be something on day one, but something that we try to encourage our founders to be thinking about. What is your broader social impact strategy? It could be philanthropic, it could be something else, but we have a belief that that's important. It's an important foundation of a business, but it's also something that could be certainly beneficial to the growth of a business over time. So Vinnie, just to wrap up our story, so we, super specialized fund, we've been making investments for 18 months now as part of our portfolio. So we've got 12 investments in our portfolio. As I mentioned, our portfolio is companies across the world. Hopefully, a couple of these names, but our focus.
Dan presented as part of this series, so.
Oh, good. Yeah, so we try to find companies relatively early, pre-seed, seed stage. Sometimes we follow them along in their journey, and we continue and follow on our investments. But as you can see here, we've got companies across the board, whether it's a company like JobPal that was doing conversational recruiting, essentially conversational chatbot, so you can communicate as you're going through that recruiting process with a perceived a person around asking questions of the job. JobPal actually was recently acquired by a company called Smart Recruiters that's based in San Francisco. So we've got some fairly innovative using AI, NLP as part of their core foundation. One of a couple of our more recent investments are a company called Animo, which is based out in Toronto. What they actually do is they take what I'll call the exhaust from your productivity applications, using email, Slack, Teams, whatever collaboration apps or productivity apps you're using, to be able to determine your team's mental wellness, their well-being. Is your team or your individuals at risk of burnout or leaving the organization? And they can do that through just understanding what happens within those productivity applications. So we've made a lot of really interesting early stage bets. We typically co-invest with other investors. Some of them are out of the Valley, but we've co-invested from everyone from Workday Ventures to Emergence Capital to funds like Global Founders Capital, which is a fund based out of Berlin. Greylock, we co-invested at Utmost. So
Leanne has presented as part of this series, and she's actually several of her portfolio companies are presented. So if you want some of these to present, happy to consider them.
Okay.
Nice.
You've
been busy.
It's been a busy year. It's been fun. The one thing I love about early stage venture investments is this is the foundation of the companies, right? And so you're really building the early architecture of not just the technology, but the business itself. And so we have companies that have founders that left school, left university to start a business. We also have founders like Upmost. These are seasoned pros that have done this multiple times, and folks in the middle that have had great exits. One of the most recent investments, and they fall in that stealth mode bucket, is a bunch of colleagues that I used to work with. My boss, mentor, and founder of Cornerstone On Demand is starting his next venture. And it's been fun to actually now, I don't want to say turn the tables, because I haven't necessarily turned the tables, but now, the CEO and founder of a very successful business, Cornerstone On Demand, is starting his next gig, and I have the opportunity now to invest into his next venture. It's weird how the world evolves, but it's certainly a lot of fun to be able to do stuff like that.
That's great.
Yeah, that's our story, Vinnie. So I really appreciate you, allowing us to take the time and share.
This is fantastic. Great time. The theme of future of work is a great one, especially after last year. And kudos. You've done a lot in 18 months.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it's only been a lot of work. It's amazing how time flies. As I think I've shared, the pandemic has been horrible in a lot of ways, but it's forcing a lot of companies to really rethink, and given them the opportunity at least to rethink what that business and future should look like, and now force them into. I think a lot of companies have reacted, right? They had to go online, they had to go on Zoom, but now we have to rebuild what this future workforce looks like. And so we got, I don't want to say lucky, because it wasn't certainly lucky, but it's certainly a really interesting opportunity for us as a fund, and it's been a lot of fun.